Thank you so much for the presentation, and we are sorry about the delay. But again, wonderful presentation. We are so glad to have discussed it and have some thoughts about it that we are also excited to share with you guys. Today, me, Matilda, and Chitnain here will be talking about the paper. Specifically, this is the overview of what we'll be speaking about really quickly. We first do a quick introduction because I think you've done a great job at it already. But then here are our individual topics where Matilda will be talking about the depoliticization of energy transition. I'll be speaking about labor and energy transition, and Chitnain would be speaking about the global dimensions of energy transition. Very quickly summarizing the paper because I think it's been done wonderfully already. The paper was developed by Négawatt Association. It takes into consideration the time period between 2017 and 2050. It pertains about the energy scenario in France, and it builds upon 7 different scenarios or sectors, I guess, including buildings, industries, agriculture, things like that. Why is it important? Because we need to really look into energy and climate change, and that's why it's important. And some spillover effects based on this scenario includes social and economic and environmental aspects that will be really redefined, including reducing energy poverty, increasing the air quality and things like that. Now, Matilda will be speaking further about the Négawatt Association.
In particular, I just want to present the Négawatt approach, which we saw before already. The core idea is that to achieve the reduction in greenhouse gas emissions that we want to achieve, we need all 3 of renewables, efficiency and sufficiency. I figured the first 2 are quite well known. The problem is more that sufficiency is a topic that's not talked about enough. So I also wanted to contextualize sufficiency a bit more for people maybe not so into the debate. I've put up the same definition that we saw before from the IPCC. Also, in the last IPCC, sort of sufficiency ideas came in properly more for the first time. I mean, it was there previously a bit in one of the chapter 5, I think, of Working Group 3. So basically, sufficiency is just all kinds of policies which reduce the final energy demand that's needed, and they can be both individual practices, but mainly also relate to changing the organization and the structure. So the total potential impact of sufficiency is estimated at around 40 to 70% by the IPCC, and one study found that one of the most impactful things that could be done is less flying, no car veganism, although studies do tend to have a bias towards individual measures. And I just want to say it's a concept which is gaining lots of traction, so there's increasing research, as we saw, there's a clever scenario, there's increasing inclusion policy documents, even if not sufficiently. And we've also seen, as in the presentation before, citizens' assemblies are tending to opt for sufficiency type measures. Right, and then my sort of critique topic that I want to talk about is the idea that it's a top-down approach to thinking about the energy transition. So just in the same way it was highlighted that one of the benefits of the clever scenario is that it's bottom-up, we'd appeal to having a more bottom-up approach to the energy transition. And here I approach this from both an ideological, so maybe more a philosophical approach, and a practical, maybe more political approach. So on the one hand, this idea of coming up with an ideal scenario of how the world could evolve, or how France could evolve, and policies limits the roles of citizens to being advocates instead of co-creators of the transition. And here are some alternatives of how to avoid doing this. So examples of unions and NGOs working together, for example, Verdi Fridays for Future, or the historic examples of pushing for a 40-hour week, which would also decrease consumption. There's some literature as well, which tries to disentangle this idea of reformist or ecological democracy, and it also downplays the insights of political ecology, which for a long time has said we need to repoliticize ecological ideas. But aside from all these sort of more philosophical abstract reasons, also from a very practical political approach, the changes that are suggested by the Négawatt scenario are going to imply major shifts in power relations. So they're going to lead to loss of power for large incumbents, be they large automobile, energy or agricultural companies, segments of the wealthy population. And as we know, people in power don't like to give up power easily. So to achieve this, it's probably not going to be sufficient to just come to policymakers and be like, here, we have a good solution, particularly because those power incumbents will also have lots of people who they can pay to lobby to also talk to policymakers. So if we want to achieve this change, we need to work together with the people who will benefit from these changes, with everyday citizens, with unions. And so even from a practical approach, we should be building bottom up and including them from day one.
Okay, now coming to my topic of discussion here, we look at labor and energy transition. Throughout the paper, we see this constant theme of talk about creation of jobs and creation of a certain number of jobs. Like by 2022, it was predicted there'll be about 1,500? 1,000? I'm losing my English, sorry. 1,000. What is it? 150,000 jobs, and then about 600,000 jobs by 2050. And these jobs that are created under the sufficiency scenario are mostly in newer domains or really heavily involve upskilling current skills. But what was quite interesting is this report by yours that focuses on labor shortage in Europe, and it focuses on skills that employers are really asking for. And a lot of these skills sort of align with what the sufficiency scenarios are projecting. So, people more needed in, say, renewable sectors, or people needed in public transports, or people who are needed in agriculture scenarios. So we see that there is a quite big skill gap that is prevalent in the market that kind of coexists with what the sufficiency scenario is aiming for. Similarly, there is also another digital skill gap that World Economic Forum estimates that about 1.67 million vacancies would be just predicted by about 2025 for ICT professionals, which again brings me to the point that what is the net positive result of the job creation really indicating at the end of the day? Because we are seeing heavy shifts of investments towards green sectors and heavy displacement of resources from the non-green sectors. But what is it triggering at the end of the day, including job losses and inability to go to nearby resources and alternatives that are present? And this also heavily ties in with Matilda's point, where the political instability or political ideologies can also affect the labor market really strongly based on who is in power currently. So I think this is what I think that Négawatt scenario here really needs to reconsider its ideas and stance on reskilling and upskilling the workers, and understanding how these new creation of scenarios also needs to take into consideration how the labor would be moving from, say, industry 1 to industry 2.
Yeah, so before I present my critique, I'll just go through some of the sections of the executive report for the Négawatt scenario. So the very first point in the executive report was basically that the energy consumption trend has reversed. And the fact that the greenhouse emissions for France are reducing nationally, but also embedded in imports. And so the trend is structural, and it's not temporary. And if we have a look at the greenhouse gas emissions for France over the years, we see that the green line is France and the other one is the EU average. It's quite positive that there is a steady decline. But if we just go on and check the dependence of France on imports, this is the net trade in goods balance for France over the years. And we see that a lot of it is negative over the entire graph, and it goes, it hits the bottom basically around 2022, which is close to 140 billion USD, which basically tells us that France is still highly dependent on imports to sustain its overall economy. But that does not really tell us about what's the composition of imports. So if you look at the composition of imports, a large share of it is fuels, a large share of it is machinery and electronics basically, chemicals, transportation, food products, textiles, so which is very carbon intensive. The carbon footprint of all of this import, which is just for 2022, is massive. And that brings me to the critique that I'm going to present here. It's basically that there is an increasing trend of social metabolism in the global north, and which is leading to a higher level of extractivism in global south. And then the waste generation and waste trade is also increasing. So the discussion about donut economy or the circular economy that Négawatt scenario touches upon really needs to be explored much more deeply. Just a quick look at this study by Doringer 2021. The purple graphs are basically high-income countries, which is basically the entire of global north. And the other groups are upper-middle income countries, middle, lower, China and India. And so it's basically talking about how the extractivism and the social metabolism of global north is increasing in terms of raw materials, energy, embodied land, and labor. And basically the entire trade value added by the global north is massive, even though it's the other groups apart from global north that are providing for all of it. So another look at studies that present a similar result is basically just the state of Latin America. So like all of the sections of the graph which are below the black line are, the ones that are below the black line are exports, and the ones that are above are import. So over a large period, we see that the material flows from global south to global north are massive. And so this basically tells us a clear picture of a rising social metabolism in global north, and the extractivism of global south is increasing massively. So when we're talking about the French economy, when we're talking about the carbon footprint, when we're talking about donut economies, there is a lot that needs to be done as of today. And just a quick look at the waste generation of this is that France had the highest waste exports in 2021, about 2.8 million of hazardous waste. So this also tells us that when we're looking about the development of efficiency and sufficiency, we also need to make sure that we have some ways of dealing with the waste. And a lot of the sufficiency approaches, as much as they're needed and entirely important, they're targeting the end user, the end person who's actually there consuming it. We're not talking about the big industries as much as it's needed. So the waste generation of France is massive, and there is inter-EU trade of that, but still if we are talking about a net negative economy for France, there's a lot that we need to do in this area as well in terms of the ecological transition. And so there is a huge interconnectedness with the entire globe, and especially global south, when we're talking about the ecological transition. Thank you. And those are our questions.
A bunch of questions. It's okay.
Yeah, I think we'll just pass the mic back. Basically, yeah, thank you for taking the time to listen to our presentation, and we look forward to the Q&A.
Thank you very much. I think you're raising very, very important issues. I mean, which we try to tackle, but it's always difficult. I mean, the first one is obviously important. I mean, the way you frame it is a bit unfair, I would say, because although I maybe didn't put enough emphasis or didn't give that perspective enough in my presentation. I mean, Négawatt on the French level is also a bottom-up scenario. We are starting with what can be done on the ground, and we are. We discuss with local authorities. I mean, we really try to consider what could be done on the local level. But so we. You know, I have in mind, I'm not sure the name will ring a bell to most of you, but one very famous and prominent engineer talking about energy transition in France called Jean-Marc Jancovici has said not long ago, we don't have the time to wait for people to understand. That is clearly a very technocratic view on energy transition. On the opposite, what we say is we need to get people to understand what is at stake and what can be done. And that's what we are trying to do. We have never presented or never wanted to present our scenario as, you know, the key term pathway that everyone should try to apply without without any question. On the contrary, it's just food for thought. We want it to be the basis of a societal discussion on where we want to go together and how we want to get there. But we are convinced that this discussion can only be sound if a realistic understanding of the stake and the possibilities is provided. That's what we are trying to do. But then you're right, it's never enough. I mean, we are competing with political offers that provide much simpler narratives and much more attractive populist ones and so on. So I mean, it's a struggle. The second point is very important also on the what you call the reformist environmentalists or radical ones. And I mean, this. I mean, it is a very old, question. That's in a way what we are trying to capture when I say we are. I mean, the need to be as ambitious. I mean, not to concede anything on ambition, but to be realistic about the process. We are trying to feed the mainstream debate. So if we are too radical, I mean, it doesn't work. But we are already seen as radical by many players. So it's always difficult to find the right balance. But that is clearly a concern. And I could, I mean, I can tell you that we are currently discussing whether we will start working on a new scenario. For we've published the 3 past ones in the process of presidential election campaigns. So should we plan for another one for the next presidential election? And if we do, what can it mean? And one of our concerns is that we are not sure at all. And we rather think that we can't. We are not sure at all that we can propose a scenario that is still meeting our fundamentals, meaning being consistent with the carbon neutrality objective, but be consistent with the democratic process of implementation. I mean, we are not sure that we don't need to consider radical changes that we can't even think ourselves to be implemented democratically. So that is the paradox we are in. And then you pointed from a more practical point of view, I mean, the incumbents and all that changes. And I often say that of the main obstacles in front of us, the democratic one, which I mentioned with these graphs on citizen assemblies and so on, is the most simple one. Then we have the economic obstacle, which is that the incumbents, I mean, big businesses are based on models for creating value that are completely opposed sufficiency. I mean, the idea of supplying sufficiency, as I emphasized. So how do we? And I'm talking about being radical. I mean, I don't think we can wait for the big day when we completely change. Where there's I mean, we bring capitalism down and so on. So we need those major incumbents to change. And how do we make them changing? I mean, is clearly very difficult. And then there's an even more difficult obstacle, which is which is geopolitics. And unfortunately, I was already saying that 3 or 4 years ago, and today it's becoming even more obvious. But the energy transition means so much of a change in the dependencies between countries, between regions of the world regarding resources, and that also relates to your third point, of course. That, I mean, I can't see it without a deep change in international governance, which is not very likely to happen. That all this doesn't mean we don't need to act on a French level. I mentioned resilience. I mean, implementing energy transition is on the national way, and that is also true on the more local way. Is a way to build resilience against all those possible bad evolutions. But I mean, clearly, we don't have the key to build the kind of changes we are talking about. On the second point of jobs, it is very important. I've just mentioned this number of jobs created. Of course, it's a net creation of jobs, and there are losses in different sectors, and we need to take care of that. And that is true in both ways, in terms of sectors and labor forces in different industries, different activities, but also in terms of territories. But because some of the activities that are bound to lose jobs are very concentrated ones, like the nuclear industry, like the oil industry for refineries in France, like car manufacturing and so on. So we really need to think of this change. It is actually something we try to address, but it's very complex because you need to get a lot beyond national aggregated numbers. What I showed you about the textile industry is one way to think about it. I mean, focusing on one sector and what kind of change could be implemented, and then you could get down to the workforce and the skills and so on. Another one is, that is typically some things that the Institut Négawatt is trying to develop. We have launched a new commercial proposal recently. I mean, a new tool called Éclore, which is developing. You know, there's in France what is called the a kind of provisional management scheme of skills and jobs. But it's provisional. It's formal. It's provisional. What we propose is to shift to a prospective management scheme of competencies and skills. For the time being, this tool is only for the building sector. I mean, what it means to shift from building new buildings to implement large thermal retrofitting programs on a local level, but we show how we could connect the information that could be gathered on the number of people trained, the number of people in the active in the sector, their skills, the number of people that are in some professional training, and how this could, how changes could be implemented so that it fits the needs and doesn't leave anyone alone. But I mean, the difficulty of it is that you really need to get down to a very detailed level for it to be meaningful. But we call for local authorities and national authorities, of course, to deal with that. On the third one, I wish we were able to develop a worldwide Négawatt scenario and not only a European one, which is already something. But you're completely right. I mean, the global consumption pattern needs to change, and but I mean, what you described in particular with your last slide and the graphs on South America and the open veins, I think was the title of the of the paper of South America. I mean, it really tells about this double dependency. Double way dependency that we need to tackle. What we try to do in our prospective work is at least to take care for not developing scenarios that where more extractivism is hidden. Sorry. The French Négawatt scenario was developed with the criteria that, I mean, we assessed the cumulative consumption of all the raw materials or the critical ones from 2020 to 2050 in our scenario, and our criteria was that this cumulative consumption should remain below 1% of the proven reserves. Meaning that, because 1% is the share of the French population in worldwide population, so that means we at least make sure that our scenario doesn't mean a pressure on extractivism. That is a first step. That is not enough because we do not need only that, but to reverse the process. No, we try to develop the same reasoning on the European level, but there are, I mean, you know, once you've said something simple like that, I mean, you need the model, the input-output model on the European level and not only on the French one, detailed between countries for all sectors, and then, okay, it's good to have the model, but you need the data, and you don't necessarily have them, so there's a lot of thinking there. We have started a project that is called Minimal, and which tries to define what the per capita consumption of critical material, particularly metals, should be. So we try to define per capita consumption of lithium, copper, iron, and so on, which we can relate to planetary boundary issues and decent living conditions concerns. And once we've done that, we try to see whether the French and European scenarios fit with that. The current, I mean, our analysis is not conclusive yet, but for instance, we have less electrification of vehicles in the French scenario than the European, than the clever one. And for the time being, it seems that the French scenarios is fit with those criteria, while the European one is not. But again, that is food for thought. But we are really trying to consider that. And of course, when I mention sustainable development goals, and that will be my last comment, I was very quick on the governance-related ones, but there's one about peace in the world. And of course, we think that reducing the need for predating resources is crucial to build a more peaceful world, and that is also part of the project beyond the Négawatt scenario. But again, thank you very much. Very good and well put perspective. Thank you.
Please, your name and country.
Thanks for the presentation and also the comments, very interesting. I'm Friederike from Germany, and I mean, you already alluded to it a little bit in like the strategic positioning of your think tank, and I'm just wondering because when it comes to EU integration on like energy and electricity markets, there's like a bit of a debate going on, like in terms of grid infrastructure and energy markets, and I'm more coming to this topic from like a price perspective and energy prices. So I'm wondering if you and your think tank also engage more into like market design, right? So then it comes to like basically not the material like foundations of it, but more like how does this get to the people through the provisioning in a way, and the dominant provisioning is a very, very liberalized electricity market. And I'm wondering if you are engaging in this kind of work too and your think tank. I think we have to collect.
I'm Arthur from the Netherlands, and I was wondering, in the overview of the scenarios that were played out, there was a relatively low share in solar PV. It looked lower than solar PV energy. And I was wondering, what are the assumptions that lead to low adaptation of solar energy in contrast to scenarios of the energy agency where solar PV outruns wind energy largely?
Hi, I'm Thomas from Norway. I also have a question about the scenario you showed, and I was wondering if you could elaborate a bit on what the scenario for nuclear power is, because you showed a phase out, and I was wondering, do you, first, do you propose an active phase out like like the one Germany did, or more just not renewing the stock, the current stock in France, and exactly why? What are the reasons you and your think tank think we should phase out nuclear power? And isn't there a danger that you exchange nuclear power for fossil fuels, like what happened in Germany, if you do it as quickly as you propose in your scenario?
Okay. Thank you very much. I thank you for the question about market. I mean, the good thing with the discussions and questions I have each time I come here is that it highlights how many issues we should be working on and we can't. I said it's on purpose that we develop physical modeling and then challenge the economy. And of course, that means we need to challenge markets and the way they are working. When it comes to electric markets, it is very difficult. I mean, talking about incumbents. I mean, we are not in capacity to really become an active player in that field. That doesn't mean we don't have concerns and we don't have ideas. The first concern is that, I mean, clearly the electric market is not working at all to deliver on energy transition. I mean, renewables are so competitive that they manage to develop quite fast, but the market is not helping as it could or it should in that sense. And so we think there's a strong need for a redesign of the market, but we also see many players calling for changes that we don't think are the right ones. So what the kind of thing we could bring in that discussion is more about principles. And again, I mean, designing markets so that they really cover the value of the items in the electric system is crucial. And again, we think that should mean shifting more faster to market options that much favor the stronger and faster development of renewables. That for the supply side, we think also that the crucial part of the electric system of tomorrow and of the energy transition is not supply. I mean, supply it's kind of it's not done yet, but we can be very confident in the fact that we can develop electric renewables to fill the needs under the condition that we design the needs to the right level through efficiency and sufficiency. But there are not many issues with renewables delivering, but there are some issues with the grid adapting, for instance. So the transport and distribution grids of electricity are more crucial assets to be taken care of by the market than supply. So that also the kind of principle we can elaborate on and talk with some players. We have discussions with ENSOE, for instance, on the European level. We can also bring some principles, of course, on the demand side. And one first reflex is to call for thinking about electric or energy bills and not electric or energy prices. The new, the next commissioner for energy, Jorgensen from Denmark, was, his hearing by the European Parliament happened a few days ago, and he said one of his top priorities was to lower energy prices for European consumers, and that is wrong. I mean, we need energy prices to get up because we need to invest much more than today. But we need efficiency and sufficiency so that the volume of kilowatt hour that we use is reduced and that it compensates the increase in the unit price. That is our vision of the right way to grasp on this issue from a political perspective. But if you start with an indicator that is just the unit price, I mean, you're wrong from the beginning in the way you frame the economic equation. And another important issue when it comes to energy prices is progressivity of the prices. I'm not sure you're familiar with that, but that means the more you're using energy units, the more you pay for them. And that could even start with a free allowance of some energy corresponding to basic energy needs, for instance. I'm not saying we are in favor of that, but we think that this is a kind of political measure that could be considered. That is for the market. For the low share of solar PV, I'm not sure I agree with you. We foresee a lot of development of PV. We also foresee a lot of development of wind power, onshore and offshore. Maybe one reason why you find it too low is that we take care again of the pace of development. And one thing that appears in the, when you look at the graphs of the development of different options in the scenario, is that PV is basically the one that doesn't get saturated. I mean, we don't tap all the potential by 2050. The increase is still very high, so maybe there would be more if you look at 2060. Another reason maybe is that, and that brings me to the last question, is that you need to take care of the balance of the grid, the balance of the electric system all along. And it is difficult to deal with variable renewables. The good thing is you can predict how much they will deliver at some time. You can predict, in some cases, long ago. I mean, we all know that there won't be a photovoltaic production at 11 p.m. In exactly 25 years, the same day, okay? But you can predict some months before, some weeks before, when it comes to large meteorological patterns, and you can predict a day ahead or even 48 hours ahead when it comes to very detailed production, which means you can implement ways like flexibility and storage ways to deal with that variability. And that is why an increasing number of scientists, of academics, of think tanks and institutional bodies foresee and develop 100% renewable scenarios for electric systems, because we have all the components. We know about the technical components that allow for such systems to work. And I think the trend, it's a trend, so it could be challenged, of course, it could be discussed, but my understanding of the trend in the different papers is that the increasing, I mean, if you're talking about 100% decarbonized electric system, you're thinking about a mix between nuclear and renewables, with nuclear between 0 and up to 50 or a little more %. The trend is that the difference in costs between renewables and new nuclear is such, and it's increasing, that it is increasingly likely to cover the additional cost of storage and flexibility that come with a 100% renewable system, compared to one when nuclear power is one of the components you're using to adjust to this variability. We will see. I'm really 100% convinced, but it's still a conviction and not a scientific proof yet, of course, because the systems we are talking about don't exist. So we will see. But what I wanted to say for regarding PV, for just one last comment, is that the French system is very specific because of the high share of nuclear power, and it makes it much less adapted to a transition to renewables than the systems where there's thermal plants, easily dispatchable thermal plants, which can cope with high penetration of renewables much better. So that might be a reason also why you can't put that much of photovoltaics in the French system until you phase out nuclear power. That brings me to the last question. I mean, clearly there are two reasons why we don't put any new reactors in our scenario. The first one is, clearly, we don't think it's sustainable enough. Nuclear reactors come with a risk of major accident, which is a high territorial risk. I mean, you know, think about living conditions in places around Chernobyl and Fukushima. I'm not talking about the number of I mean, the fatalities. I don't think it's the right indicator. The right indicator is how many people get their lives completely disrupted by the accident, and that's a lot. There was an assessment by the French Institute on radio protection and nuclear safety after Fukushima, which rated the cost for the French economy of a major nuclear accident in terms of hundreds of billions of euros. So that is a specific risk which doesn't exist, of course, if you go for 100% renewables. You won't. I mean, the Rhone Valley can't become an exclusion territory with 100% renewable scenarios. Second risk is, second concern is the intergenerational transfer of the burden of managing radioactive waste. I mean, whether you think the eventual management of them will be safe or not, okay, that could be discussed, but no one thinks that it could be solved, that we could complete the management of the waste of the existing fleet before the middle of the next century. So we are planning for next generation to deal with waste we are producing for our own benefit. Okay, that something, I mean, it completely fits the definition of not sustainable. And the third one is the link between civil nuclear power and the military use of nuclear energy. Of course, you can say it's not that much of a concern on a French level or even a European level. If you put it in a worldwide perspective, that is a very good reason not to spread nuclear power everywhere. And the technological option that can't be shared by everyone is, again, by definition, not sustainable. That's the first reason. The second one is what I just mentioned. It's too expensive and too late anyway. I mean, we can't, even in France, which has probably the third best nuclear industry in the world in terms of capacity after the Russian and the Chinese. I would say maybe even the Chinese first. Even in France, we can't project any new reactor to come into service before 2035. That is when we must meet 55% of reduction of our emissions under the Fit for 55 framework, for instance, on the European level. So that is too late, and we consider that any euro, any time that is invested in developing those reactors is actually lost once and for all for the options that would deliver much faster and much more effectively. So, and then, okay, once we have said there are no new reactors in our scenario, and I mean, we would put new reactors if they would be needed. If our conclusion, if we would come to the conclusion that, okay, we can't make it with 100% renewables and sufficiency and efficiency, and therefore we need fossil fuel in the electric system, of course we would reconsider. But that's not the case, so we don't need it. And then, I mean, the main issue in France is how you deal with phasing out a nuclear fleet that is concentrated in 10 years of age. So you can't really plan for a smooth phase out, and and with the level of dependency of the electric security to that nuclear capacity. I mean, phasing out, we would need, in theory, we will need at some point to phase out 5 gigawatts of nuclear power every year for 10 years. I mean, we won't make it. We won't, if we don't anticipate and prepare and smoothen by starting shutting down reactors earlier, we won't manage securely, and I mean the government and EDF just postpone the problem because it's too big. I think, I mean, Germany took it completely differently. It's wrong to say that it increased its use of fossil fuel because it's phased out nuclear. It's really wrong if you look at statistics. It's also wrong, I think, to say that it would have reduced its emissions faster should it keep its nuclear reactors up, because I think in that case they would not have developed renewables that fast. The thing is, they have developed renewables much faster than they have phased out nuclear power, which is why they didn't increase fossil fuel emissions. But maybe to put this in a political perspective, I think it's funny, it's mirroring between France and Germany, but in both countries, I think nuclear has been the actual dominant political topic in the climate discussion for opposite reasons, with opposite results, but with similar limitations. Clearly, the kind of national consensus on the willingness to phase out nuclear power in Germany was the main driver of the energy transition, of developing fast renewables, and we all owe Germany that it sustained the progress of renewables that we all benefit from. But clearly also know that it achieved its nuclear phase out. I mean, I mean, the climate is not enough of a goal to sustain the same pace of energy transition. And that is part, I think, of the global political crisis that Germany is unfortunately facing. And in France, I mean, most of the so-called climate ambition was actually a way to support keeping the nuclear reactors on. And there was a lot of political support to that. There still is. But know that the president has committed to saving the nuclear program by launching a new round of build of nuclear reactors. I mean, there's a strong opposition to the energy transition. So in both cases, what drives politics is the relationship to nuclear rather than climate ambition, unfortunately.
We are running out of time, but let's have a short round. Don't know if
Hi, Sarah from Germany. Sorry, I'm once again asking about prices. In your response to Friederike's question, you talked about how you have the perception that energy prices should rather go up, and the question was rather about electricity bills going down, which I found a very interesting perspective, and I was just wondering whether you have any take on what the related policies could be, how you would, for instance, evaluate the policies that were adopted in the 2022 energy price crisis across Europe. I mean, France had this sort of caps on electricity prices. In Germany, there was this gas price brake mechanism. And in Spain, they also did like a special exception to how the marginal pricing system works. And I was just wondering whether one of those options would be the option that you would go for, or whether you have any ideas on how bringing down energy bills could look like.
Hello, Daniela from El Salvador, and I have a really short question regarding the job creation estimation. I was wondering if it's accounting only for direct effects, or direct effects, like only direct job creation in the energy sector, or if it also includes indirect effects or even induced effects for the rest of the economy.
maybe the last one, because otherwise you won't have time for break.
I have a question because your answer to the questions, I think what the first thing it's one of the things that you said is that you feed the mainstream debate. Négawatt, you feed the mainstream debate, and I think that there is a problem with this thing. I heard Thierry Salomon, which you know, say the same kind of thing. I think is that you have to make a scenario that is acceptable for the people. I mean, acceptable, understandable, I know, but I think there is a large distance between what needs to be done and this acceptable scenario. I mean, there is a question for our society to radically change. And to me, it seems that the scenario doesn't bring really this radical change. Rather, it just puts a possibility for our society to go on in a different way, but not. I think it's not radical enough. For instance, I think that when you come to 2050, I mean, with the scenario, I think there is still a problem with the resources. You still need to just change the cars and keep the infrastructure, and I mean, I think the question has to be deepened. I think we need to change more radically. So I think there is a problem with this perspective to just be understandable for the people, because if it doesn't bring a sufficient answer, it doesn't really answer, you know.
Okay, thanks. They have another session at 4:30, so I will kindly ask you to keep short.
Well, big questions. I won't get into the details of trying to answer your question about mechanisms for mitigating prices and bills, and I'm not good enough on that topic. I'm happy to discuss it maybe and try to bring some thoughts, but as you mentioned, the energy crisis linked to the war in Ukraine and strengthened in France by the failure of some nuclear reactors at the same time. I remember one energy economist saying in one roundtable at that where I participated at that time, "Oh, we probably got it wrong in the way we assessed the cost of thermal retrofitting. We should have included an insurance cost." Yes. Think about the tens of billions of euros that have been spent by the government just to compensate for households and local businesses the impact of rising prices of energy. I mean, these tens of billions would have been so much better invested in thermal retrofitting to reduce the amount of energy needed and therefore reduce the burden of the increase of prices. So, I mean, rather than just thinking of, better designing the market and so on, we need to frame the economic assessment differently and therefore frame our policy making differently. Regarding jobs creation, the numbers I gave are only direct. It's an aggregated assessment of the jobs. I mean, we take the whole Négawatt scenario. We look at what it means in terms of capex and opex in all sectors, and we relate those capex and opex to jobs. I mean, the economics provide us with ratios of jobs in different sectors, depending on euros spent. But that's, I mean, this result is based on that analysis. To answer your question, you need to run some macroeconomic analysis, macroeconomic modeling. So you need to use models that are techno-explicit enough to be able to grasp a pathway like the one described by the Négawatt scenario, and put it in macroeconomic in the macroeconomic framework. We didn't do that with the latest scenario. We did that with scenarios before, using two prominent models. One is 3ME that was developed by OFC and ADEME. And the other one is IMACLIM Air that was developed by CIRED, which is a CNRS lab. In both cases, it's very good. The results are positive. It creates jobs, it increases purchase of power, reduces improves the French commercial balance, and is even good for GDP. Wow. But when you look at the details, these models are using, for instance, are really, I mean, a crucial assumption in them is the growth of work productivity. And they project a continuation of the linear trend to the increase of work productivity. When we ask them how sensitive the results are to that criteria, it shows that the assessment of any scenario is much varying when you change that parameter That's the difference between two scenarios. In other words, what we need to know is whether Négawatt or ambitious energy transition scenarios mean in terms of evolution of work productivity, and the existing models are not able to tell us. So I just don't know. We think that there are good reasons when you look at it in microeconomic terms, value creation in territories, new activities which need more jobs than others and so on. There are good reasons for it to work, to maintain welfare, to maintain some growth, maybe not measured through GDP, but existing. But we are just calling for economists to provide us with good models to assess this kind of issue for the time being. And that's, in a way, the same kind of problem that I highlighted with the thermal, costing thermal retrofitting. Economists are not ready to provide good answers to those issues. And finally, on the radicality and acceptability, I mean, our role, we see our role as experts trying to foster a better understanding of what is at stake and what could be done. If you look at it from a theory of change perspective, this is a role that is mostly useful in shifting from collective denial to collective willing to change. And then, of course, I mean, Institut Négawatt, for instance, which helps implementing energy transition, is in the theory of change framework, more active in the next phase when you're preparing for change and implementing the change. But if you want to convince everyone that we need some change, I mean, radicality, we think, is not the right way, because then you're not heard. But, I mean, again, reformist or radical is a kind of eternal discussion between players that want to bring some change. We think we have some credit in moving the terms of the debate the way we have tried to do. I mean, France was the only country to have explicitly a sufficiency plan during the energy crisis, for instance. France is the only country where CEOs signed op-eds calling for sufficiency. That is not enough. Know that the wind has turned and conservatives are back in power, or more in power than before, and so on. And the crisis is somehow disappearing. You can see that this concern is falling, but at least there was some concern, there was some discussion. So again, we think we need some players to call for radical changes. I'm not saying we don't need that, but we think it's not our role to get more radical. Our role is to propose something that is understood by people as democratically feasible. And if we propose something more radical, what we propose is a non-democratic change, which makes some sense. But I completely agree that there is a debate. And maybe the last thing there is, one thing we are missing in the landscape is the scenarios of the worst. All our scenarios, I mean, I'm talking about Négawatt, ADEME, RTE, all the players that develop scenarios in France, but that is also true, at least on the European level. I've never seen any scenario meeting what I will just say, but maybe that exists somewhere. None of our scenarios, or all our scenarios, are built on models that project a continuity in the conditions of implementation. We have continuous modeling. That progressively led most of us to give up on developing what was once called business as usual scenarios. You know, which are very useful to compare the benefits of changing to, and we don't produce business as usual scenarios anymore because we think that is a way to give credit to a continuation of things which we think is not possible, which we think will lead us to breaking points. But, so we avoid to put in the debate a projection of, you know, smooth continuation. But we are not able, because of our modeling, we are not able to project the breaking point and to say through our modeling, this is where it ends, where we can't cope anymore with no radical change. So we don't have, you know, from a modeling and expertise perspective, we miss the tools to to advocate for more radical changes. That is also part, you know, I was telling you, we are thinking of what we need to do in prospective terms for the next round of political debate. That is also part of our reasoning. How do we convince people that thinking we don't need deep changes, call them radical or not, deep changes, how we convince more enough people so that it democratically happens that we need deep changes is a key point, and you can witness that there are very adverse forces that prevents us to convince more of our fellowships.